Hello ladies and gentlemen. Today I was able to play some of the Naval pre-beta stuff, which is available on War Thunder right now. It is in the events tab. If you want a schedule for us, there is a news article on the War Thunder website that you can see if you have access to the pre-beta test. So I was able to play the Tribal class destroyer, the Fletcher class, and also some of the smaller boats. And these won't be all of my thoughts about it, but it'll just be some key ones that I thought would be interesting to talk about. Of course, it being in a pre-beta test area, as you saw from the disclaimer, everything is subject to change, everything can change, and probably will change when it comes to even getting into the beta itself. So let's get into it. I'm not going to talk a lot about map design or anything, because they're just testing some stuff out. I'll comment a little bit on larger ships and smaller ships, but that's really about it. So the aiming system that you get for each of the guns I think works very well. It's very similar to what you would get. It's a mixture of tanks and aircraft gunners. So if you have AA selected or any of them selected, you'll get the small reticle showing where the gun is pointing at that moment in time. And because of that, you have to, wait for them all to line up, and then you can fire them if you want to be accurate at all. And I think that works really well, because it means that, you can tell when all of your guns are lined up, and also it gives you a indicator how far away what you're shooting at is, very similar to a rangefinder that you will see on some high tier 5 tanks in the game. Also, even though the aiming I think works well and leaves some area for skill, obviously with the range finding and everything like that, I felt a lot of the time when targets were closer to me I had to aim low to be able to actually hit the target. So a lot of the time when I was either shooting destroyers or the boats, the AI boats which were running about, when I was shooting center mass, the shots would go high. And when I shot just below them, they would actually shoot, center mass, depending on how close to the target I was. So I feel like there is some area there which needs to be tweaked when it comes to the aiming reticle and things like that. Also, when it comes to the aiming, once you're in the aiming mode, it's obvious that it's on a camera in the middle of the ship. And on certain ships, such as the Tribal class destroyer, there's actually wires and stuff around where that camera position is. Very similar to with a tank, where it's sat in part, it's in simulator, it's sat on top of the tank. That's very similar to where you see it on the ship. It's sat on the center mat of the ship, probably on a bridgehead. So what you see is when you move the aimer around, you will actually run into cables and stuff which will just completely block your view. So I feel like that has to be addressed at some point. Maybe the ship that you're in becomes invisible or something when you're aiming, I don't know. I'm also a bit less worried about the interactions between aircraft and ships. I have been talking about quite a lot how the anti-aircraft of these ships is going to pretty much annihilate planes, and even though there is still a lot to be desired when it comes to testing this and everything like that, also when we get crew skills involved and things like that, I am at least less worried right now. The reason for that is because the anti-aircraft on these ships seems incredibly slow to turn and to move. They also seem to be able to overheat and then never come back again, so once they've overheated, you can't seem to cool them down or repair them, they just stop working. Maybe there is a repair mechanic or something that takes time, but I couldn't find anything on the screen. But generally, when it came to the AA, because it was so slow, it meant that planes could whip in and whip out without too much notice. So generally, I'm feeling a lot better about that. I still think it is maybe going to be an issue. Well, it's definitely going to be an issue with the larger ships, but with the destroyers that we have right now, it's not too bad. Also, the aiming for the AA guns is really, really rough, because it tries to calculate how far away the target is, and sometimes, or the majority of the time, because you're trying to aim in front of an aircraft and stuff like that, it will just aim like miles and miles away, so therefore it's very hard to hit. That may be something that needs to be looked at. I don't really value HE shells, really at all, compared to the AP and AP HE shells that you get. The AP shells, which are on the Fletcher and the Tribal class, and the AP HE, which I believe are on the Project 7Us, seem to be infinitely better than the HE. When I brought up this point before, a lot of people said, well, HE causes fires. Well, so does AP. AP causes quite a lot of fire, actually, if you shoot them in the right areas. If you hit them in the engines, if you hit them in the the smokestacks, or whatever you want to call them, they do cause fires. Maybe they don't penetrate and blow up ammunition racks, but the HE doesn't either, because it has pretty much no penetration. So, yeah, HE leaves a lot to be desired, but then again, that's exactly the same in tanks, really. There is only a few areas where HE are useful, and generally, the majority of the time, AP-HE is going to be better. Ships are a lot slower than I expected, but more maneuverable. Now, what I mean by this is the ships themselves, if you actually look at the indicators, they're not that slow. Like, they're still cantering around 40 to 60 kilometers an hour. But it just feels slow. And maybe that's just because these ships are massive, and it's going to take time to get used to it. But when a plane is whizzing around, you can tell the difference between them. Maybe if I saw like a tank going next to the ship, maybe that would give me some perspective. And maybe the fact that the maps are absolutely huge, there's also that as well. So it's a little observation. It doesn't really mean anything overall, but the maneuverability thing does. It's going to be very hard to be hit by torpedoes in this thing. I think torpedoes have a limited use, even for these larger destroyers, just because they're able to turn pretty quickly as long as you're paying attention, which, you know, most of the time you should be, or at least, you know, you hear your AI gunners going off trying to kill something. Yeah, it's pretty obvious that there's a smaller ship trying to torpedo you. But it's not that hard to maneuver away from torpedoes. It's definitely going to be something that is going to catch out people, but I don't think it's going to do a lot when it comes to actually killing them. Which, you know, is interesting. I definitely feel like there is no place for smaller ships against these larger ships. Unless there's something I'm really missing, the smaller ships just get absolutely shit-canned by the larger ones. Maybe I am just missing something key, or missing a playstyle. Maybe they haven't been figured out yet. But when it comes to the smaller ships get destroyed by aircraft, they get destroyed by larger ships. Maybe they're supposed to capture zones and stuff like that, but there's just not really much of a point in them. The smaller ships just can't face these larger ships. The torpedoes are not fast enough, they're not good enough to be able to do it. They can't lay mines, they can lay depth charges sometimes, but they go off very quickly. And if you're that close to a destroyer, it's just going to blow you out the water, because all he has to do is hit you with one shell, and then you get hull broken and die, so yeah. That's going to be something to look into as we go along in this, just to see if the smaller ships actually have a purpose, because right now, unless we're playing on a smaller map where destroyers aren't allowed, I don't really see the point in the smaller ships, once you've added in these larger ones. The gun sounds themselves are amazing. You'll probably hear it in this video. Sometimes they do have the problem that War Thunder has always had, especially shown in tanks, where if you have too many sounds going on at once, sometimes certain sounds just don't get played, so you know, you'll have main guns firing but there's no sound, or you'll have machine guns firing but there's no sound. But overall, the guns sound great. It's a really nice noise. And also, going back to sound, if torpedoes are near you, then I think it's the same guy, but if you've watched the Thunder show, there is either an Eastern European or a Russian guy who does like the English version of it, and he has this very this very cool accent, and when the torpedoes come in, you might hear it in the video again, when the torpedoes come in and come close to you, he says stuff like, warning, torpedoes close, warning, torpedoes close, or something like that. And it was just kind of jarring for me, because it's like, where have I heard this voice before? And it was just, oh, it was funny as hell. I hope they keep little tidbits like that in the game, just like you have in aircraft and tanks, where you just have random voice lines which are like, oh, okay. It's a little bit immersion breaking, but it's fine. Aircraft do a decent amount of damage to ships, but not enough to cripple them, so it'll be interesting to see how they balance that. Obviously, I haven't tried all of the aircraft. I was able to get into a Typhoon, a Corsair, and also a Hellcat, I believe, or it might have just been a Hellcat, and the Corsair didn't have anything to shoot at the ships with. But the rockets that the Typhoon had didn't generally do a lot to the ship. It set it on fire, but when it comes to crippling damage, I was able to hit it with quite a few of them, and it didn't seem to do a lot. The 20s, on the other hand, pretty much yellowed the whole ship and also knocked out a lot of the guns, so I feel like a lot of people in their aircraft are going to use aircraft to try and knock out areas of ships, try and knock out their main guns, so therefore ships will get crippled and they can't really do anything for a long time until, you know, their crew moves about and stuff like that. But when it comes to actual killing damage, I think it's going to be quite hard to do in a plane unless you're using torpedoes or maybe bombs. The hit registry is still a bit weird for the rockets, and the bombs sometimes they just fall straight through or go straight through the target, so that has to be addressed, but as I said, we are at a pre-beta stage. I'm sure it will be. But when it comes to the smaller ships, the very small boats, they get absolutely destroyed by aircraft, so yeah, they're not going to have a hope in hell, to be quite honest. But the larger ships seem to deal with this a lot better, and there was definitely a sense of interesting fighting when you're going down a column of ships and shooting and strafing them with an aircraft. That's just fun to me. It was a nice little experience, but there's some general thoughts on these ships for this weekend. I'll probably try and do a video like this for each of the pre-beta tests that we see, just to give some general thoughts, which are not just recapping what's in them. But overall, positive. I'm feeling a lot better about it. I still think it's going to be my least favourite game mode out of the three, but you know, there's always got to be a best one, there's always got to be a worst one. That's unfortunately how it goes. And for me, ships are not as interesting as aircraft, which are not as interesting as tanks. But anyway, I hope you all have a lovely day and happy Canada Day. And I'll see you next time.